Do you know where the next war might start? That could be in the snow-capped mountains and Himalayan mountain ranges. Two military superpowers have disagreements where tensions are fluctuating, but are always usually in the super tense stage. Wars and skirmishes have been fought here, and a solution to this disagreement still hasn't been found yet. Who are those two superpowers? It's China and India. India has always had border disputes with China regarding the extent of their respective borders, clashing since the early 1950s all the way until now. During this time, skirmishes have left people dead and civilians raging on the streets. But where is this border dispute? India and China share over 2,000 miles of land, which the two countries have disputed for over 70 years. However, the territorial dispute that we're going to focus on today is the line of actual control, aka the Sino-Indian border dispute. The whole dispute over this long border happened when the People's Republic of China occupied Tibet in 1949. This movement was the move that created one of the lengthiest undemarcated borders in the world. The reason for this was that such close proximity of the Chinese military to the undemarcated border created significant alarm in New Delhi, the capital of India. The Indian Prime Minister at the time, Jawaharlal Nehru, was urged by the government to enhance their military presence in India's northeast region in the case of an invasion by China. From then on, tensions between China and India over the disputed borders have escalated. The two countries became snappier at each other, and they both found pleasure in pointing out the borders between them are incorrect, and each claimed that their own version of the borders were more accurate. Naturally, when people drew the maps, they made some accidental mistakes since the land was all mountains and it was hard to pinpoint each point. Each mistake led to higher tensions, since the country that made the accidental mistake would be blamed by the other country for doing that intentionally. Eventually, all this erupted into a war over the border in 1962, called the Sino-Indian War, lasting from October 20th, 1962 to November 21st the same year. In this war, the Chinese troops stormed over two theaters, completely overrunning the Indians, who were caught off guard. The war ended when China declared a ceasefire on November 20th, 1962, and simultaneously announced its withdrawal to its claimed line of actual control. Unfortunately, the war did nothing to calm the tensions, and ever since then, sporadic gunfire erupts from time to time and a couple of people die from time to time. But thankfully, there were no more wars on the same scale as the Sino-Indian War. The two superpowers seemed to escalate the tensions while claiming to be committed to avoiding another war. Both countries continued to construct highways and buildings in preparation for the upcoming war. But what they don't seem to realize is that if they claim not to want a war, then they shouldn't be building anything that might trigger a war. For example, in 2017, the People's Liberation Army extended a road into Dockline region by Bhutan. India responded by sending troops into the region to halt the construction, but mercifully by the August of the same year, both sides had withdrawn their forces. Another example is in June of 2020, Indian Chinese troops engaged in a skirmish along the border because the Chinese weren't pleased with the India road construction in the Ladakh region. Due to this, a considerable melee took place in mid-June, resulting in the death of 20 Indian soldiers and about 30 Chinese soldiers. The fight involved only hand-to-hand combat and sticks studded with nails, but didn't include the firing of weapons. Both sides continue to claim that the other side is assembling troops and military transports along the line and building defensive positions to fortify the claims to the regions. The issue is further problematized by the accusations and mocks by government officials and state-aligned media outlets from both countries. Propaganda is in a big place here, since occasionally there will be nationalists in the streets supporting their own country in war and slandering the other. Therefore, this shows that the other side is obliged to send troops and fight, since it would be a huge national embarrassment if one side lets the other side build construction and possibly give them an advantage in the face of a war. We guess that the reason why they continue to build is that they want to have a face in an international world. Backing down, such as halting constructions or recalling troops, would be a national embarrassment. However, they don't want to fight this war since it would be a meaningless war as we explained earlier. So both sides are now in a deadlock with no way out, unless some solution is found quickly. The world and two respective nuclear superpowers won't be able to afford a war. This dispute is increasingly important since both countries are superpowers with modern militaries and nuclear weapons. Furthermore, the two countries account for about 35% of the global population alone and 21% of the global GDP. Also, fighting in the Himalayan mountain ranges is arduous, and the terrain wouldn't be fit for mounted vehicles, resulting in most attacks being incursions by infantry or helicopter squadron units, without ample enough reinforcements from tanks and other overland transport to the site of the battle. The cold weather and rough terrain would also severely deteriorate morale throughout both armies. Additionally, both sides are pretty much neck to neck over technological advancements, which means that technology won't bring much of an advantage in the case of war. And both sides most likely won't receive any military support from their allies, since no country would want to send its troops to fight in such a dismal place. Therefore, the war, if it does break out, would just be between India and China. This would therefore be another dreadful attrition war that the world does not need. Disregarding the war, although the overall outcome of this border dispute is uncertain, it will most likely continue for some time until somehow both sides come to agreement. More on this at the end of the video. Be sure to stay on and continue listening. However, one good consequence of this border dispute is that they seem to use this territorial disagreement and convert this into a sense of nationalism and restore faith in their own federal government. This is especially needed after the COVID-19 pandemic completely wrecked both sides' economy and faith in their respective countries. But it really isn't worth sacrificing lives in order to achieve this. Therefore, this dispute has to cease as soon as possible. There was a series of negotiations between Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai, left of the picture, and Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, right of the picture, that continued for 5 days and ended in complete failure. Nehru apparently rejected the Chinese package deal that offered Beijing's acceptance of the Indian position in the eastern sector, in return for India's acceptance of the Chinese position in the western sector. The Chinese delegation returned to Beijing with the belief that the Indians were not interested in negotiating. Tensions have only increased over the next couple of years, with the Indian army pushing northward using the controversial forward policy, and the PLA units responding tit for tat, resulting in small skirmishes that periodically appear. Therefore, it is clear that although India and China have the disagreements regarding the border, they don't seem to want to take any actions to resolve it, just happy to leave the situation as it is. There isn't really any need for worry over this border dispute. Both sides most likely wouldn't dare to go to war due to international pressure in the UN. The rest of the world would frown on both India and China if they go to war, since if this escalated to a full-scale war, all the countries in the world would feel its consequence, and no one wants that. However, News Asia has given this particular border dispute some thought and has come up with some solutions, calling the United Nations (UN) for assistance. Since India and China have a long-standing agreement on not bringing firearms anywhere near their line of actual control, patrols could only fight with rocks, bamboo sticks studded with nails, and hand-to-hand combat. However, even though this is significantly better than having firearms, people are still dying, and that's tragic. Therefore, both countries could call on the UN for help. Some of the UN's purpose that could be applicable in this situation includes monitoring a disputed border, monitoring and observing peace in post-conflict areas, and providing security across a conflict zone. The UN peacekeeping, a branch of the UN, might also be useful in this situation. The specialties include actions such as to prevent conflicts, reduce violence, and strengthen security, and most importantly, empower national authorities to resolve their issues and disagreements peacefully with other countries. We believe that the UN and its branches could be called on to help de-escalate the circumstances in a line of actual control. Another solution we could reinforce is to urge both countries to stop building infrastructure. Building infrastructure along the borders is one of the main causes for conflict, as proved earlier in the video. If both countries agree to cease construction that could be used in the face of a war, then there wouldn't be any need for building. Then one of the major causes of conflict could be avoided. As usual, thank you so much for viewing this video about the border dispute between India and China. Next time.